I'm going to be talking about post-quantum cryptography. Thank you all for coming. Specifically, we're going to start off talking about the history of both quantum computing and post-quantum cryptography. We're going to talk about what quantum computers even are. We're going to talk about Shor's algorithm, which is... okay. I was like, is there something back there? Okay. Is there something that needs my attention? We're going to talk about Shor's algorithm, which is the kind of reason that we have this issue. We can talk about hard problems, then the threat level that quantum computers pose, how we're going to fix those threats, and then what the status is currently, and then what you can look forward to in the future. But a bit about me. I'm a hacker, obviously. I'm a cypherpunk. Ever since I found out that you can keep secrets with math, I've been completely hooked. I've worked as an applied cryptographer, most notably at Cisco Systems on their cryptographic applications team doing applied cryptography stuff, including post-quantum stuff. But I'm very much on the applied side, so I'm not a mathematician and I'm not a physicist. So some of the things, the math, like the deep math stuff, the physics stuff in this presentation, I might just have to hand wave about, both because it won't fit in this presentation and I don't have that much experience with it. Because on the applied side, it's like, a whole different set of concerns. Yeah, so the history of quantum computers starts in the 1920s when the double slit experiment found that light is sometimes a wave, sometimes a particle, and this broke physics. And we're still trying to figure out what the hell is even going on. And physics was kind of grappling with that. And then in the 80s, when classical computers were getting big, theories started to come out about quantum computing or using quantum phenomena for computing reasons, especially the idea of quantum parallelism. You might have heard that quantum computers try every possible solution to a problem at once. That's quantum parallelism. That's not actually how it works, but it's a good mental model to conceptualize them. Then in 1984, Shor's algorithm was released. Shor's algorithm is a way for quantum computers to factor primes for large numbers, which is how most of our cryptography today is kind of built around that. And we'll talk about most of these things in more depth in a little bit. Yeah, so Shor's algorithm came out in 1994. It was pretty much immediately recognized as a threat to cryptography. So in 96, lattice cryptography was introduced. And then in 98, we had a full public key encryption system based on lattices. A survey in 2001 found that most cryptographers were aware of Shor's algorithm as a threat, and agreed that we needed to address this. And then work on post-quantum cryptography continued and grew, mostly in the academic world. By 2006, we had the first post-quantum cryptography conference. Then jumping to 2016, the Open Quantum Safe project started. This is a project to do the actual code implementation. And then the NIST post-quantum cryptography competition started. This is a competition to select which algorithms that NIST thinks is good enough for the federal government to use. In 2017, those submissions were due. Then in 2023, just last year, Signal released their post-quantum cryptography update. And then this year, we've been seeing more and more releases of post-quantum cryptography into production environments. And then by the end of this year, the NIST competition will be complete and we'll actually have standards that NIST approves of. So what even are quantum computers? They're a computer that uses quantum phenomena to do computation. So instead of using electricity and transistors, you're using entanglement and wave collapse and stuff. They're probabilistic, so like nominally, classical computers are deterministic. It's like sometimes they're not, but but quantum computers are probabilistic, like all the time. So you'll run a program and it'll say this is probably the right answer, but you need to go check to make sure that it's right. So often a quantum computer will be paired with a fast classical computer, and the classical computer will do the control stuff and the I/O and also check the answers. Physically, quantum computers are like these steampunk like stalactites that are really cool. They operate at 15 millikelvin, so that's a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. There's like a whole branch of hacking physics just to get things this cold. So this is a picture of the quantum computer, and this little gray square is the actual chip, and the rest of the wires and stuff are either I/O or cooling. And you'll see there's like several different tiers, which is mainly due to cooling, where each tier gets colder, which is pretty cool. Quantum computers use qubits. So in classical computers, we have bits that use that are just 1 or 0. In quantum computers, we have qubits, which are kind of 1 and 0. You don't really know until you observe them what they are, and there's a probability curve that you can set. And then there's the quantum gates, which work similarly to logic gates in that you can use them to connect the qubits and do logic with them. And it's all probabilistic, so you program them with wave interference. So this is part of the stuff that I only kind of understand. But the different qubits you will connect with the gates such that they're linked probability-wise. And so to program them, it reminds me a lot more of like Prolog or more like declarative programming paradigms, where you're describing an entire system that will eventually will give you the answer, rather than with classical programming and where you're like writing code that is executing sequentially, like step by step. Let me check this. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Quantum computers are very susceptible to decoherence and noise. Decoherence is where the qubits become unlinked to each other, which is kind of like your program breaking down. So that's one of the reasons why they operate at 15 millikelvin, is to prevent the noise because of physics reasons. And then there's quantum advantage, which is a state where we consider that a quantum computer is better at a given task than a classical computer. Just last year, I think, quantum advantage was achieved, with the caveat that the problem that they had it do was specifically made for that computer to be better than classical computers at. So it's a kind of contrived, at this point at least, system where they're like, we can do this problem better than a classical computer, but we also made this problem specifically for this quantum advantage proof. But yeah. In this, yeah.
Is the quantum advantage measured like per computer or is it like per watt dollar or something like that?
It's more. The question was if quantum advantage is measured by like efficiency and like watts per dollar. It's more theoretical than that. It's like the.
Like you can, when you see it.
It's more like they'll do an analysis on the problem and be like, oh, this is like O of n squared or whatever, and they can prove that the theoretical that their computer can do it faster than any theoretical classical computer with their analysis. Yeah, so in this presentation, I don't want to get the impression that I'm anti-quantum computer. Like, I'm a hacker. You show me a weird computer, I'm going to be a fan. That's just how it works. And there's a lot of cool uses for them that I wanted to highlight, especially they're really good at modeling quantum phenomena because they are quantum. They can just do that. They can also solve the traveling salesman problem like really quickly, which can be useful for a lot of things. They're also useful for simulation of physics, especially like some applications could be protein folding and also materials science, which could really benefit from using quantum computers. So they're not all bad. I just don't want them breaking cryptography. Yeah, so Shor's algorithm is the kind of reason that that quantum computers can break cryptography. It's a way to make prime factorization easier, which I said before. So you have like a number, and then to get the primes that multiply to make that number is very hard to do for a classical computer, but much easier to do for a quantum computer. And the problem is that this factorization problem is how we have built a lot of modern cryptography systems, which we'll talk a little bit, or in a bit more depth a bit later. But the hard problems that Shor's algorithm can break are integer factorization, which RSA uses. And then also, because of math, it can also break the discrete log problem, which is what Diffie-Hellman uses, and the elliptic curve discrete log, which is what elliptic curve cryptography uses. So Shor's algorithm works by you make a guess about what one of the primes is. So you tell the quantum computer, I want to factor this number, and I think this is one of the primes. And you're probably wrong, almost certainly wrong. But then you run Shor's algorithm, and then the quantum computer will give you a better guess. And you can do that continuously until you get the actual results. So it is still brute forcing. You're still checking a bunch of things. A lot of people imply that it's like an instantaneous thing. It's not. It's just a lot faster. To do the factorization to beat RSA 2048 with a classical computer, we often talk about like computers the size of the physical universe running for the entire length that the universe has existed, probably not being able to break it. A big enough quantum computer could break it in like a day or less. I mentioned hard problems. These are the kind of mathematical building blocks that we build cryptographic systems out of. They're easy to do one way, hard to do the other way. I talked about prime factorization, so it's very easy to do 461 times 991 and getting 456,851. Most people could do that just like with a piece of paper and a pen. It might take a bit, but you could do that. Computers can do it pretty much immediately. But going the other way, if I gave you 456,851 and asked you to find the primes, that takes a long time, and you have to check each one. And like I said, we build cryptographic systems with these, and how we're going to, in cryptography, there's a concept called cryptographic agility, which is kind of a design principle that your cryptographic system should be able to swap out hard problems when needed. And if you've used TLS, you might know of the TLS cipher suite tags. This is essentially cryptographic agility, where you can just swap out from RSA to elliptic curve, depending like if both systems support it and stuff. But this is how we're going to fix or protect against Shor's algorithm, is swapping out hard problems for new ones. So in a couple years, we might see TLS cipher suite tags with post-quantum stuff in them. Okay. So there's been a lot of fairly dramatic articles and videos and stuff about post-quantum, or about quantum. So like, how bad is it? This one says, no secret is safe. How quantum computers break the internet starting now. Or quantum computers destroy internet security. And my favorite, Google's quantum computer finally turned on, and what scientists discovered is terrifying. So they are a serious threat. We do like actually need to fix this. But it's not as bad as a lot of people imply or say. Like, a lot of them imply that they can instantaneously break it, or that if you get a big enough quantum computer, then all of the internet is like immediately clear text. It's not that bad. We still need to fix it though. But it's, yeah, I don't really like those like very dramatic claims. The nice thing is that a lot of work has already been done. Like we talked about in the histories section, Shor's algorithm was released. 2 years later, we had post-quantum cryptography, specifically to protect against Shor's algorithm, and that work has been going since the 90s. Also, symmetric systems aren't vulnerable. In cryptography, we have asymmetric and symmetric systems, where symmetric systems only use one key, and they are not vulnerable to quantum computers, especially like AES is still safe. Quantum attacks are probably not possible today, given our level of sophistication with our most advanced quantum computers. Yeah, it's definitely infeasible now. It might not be feasible ever. It's always dangerous to speculate about new technology and saying that this will not happen, but there's reason for some skepticism. I talked about the decoherence and noise, where your qubits will become disconnected and out of sync with each other, or they'll just like have errors. And that's a thing to deal with. And you need over 6,000 qubits to break RSA 2048. The biggest quantum computer we have is just over 1,000 qubits, and the rate at which we're adding qubits hasn't been following Moore's law, at least that I've seen, because the more qubits you put on a chip, the more decoherence and the more noise you have. So scaling them, at least now, is very difficult. There might be some new paradigm shifts that make it super easy, and like we need to protect against it, but there's some reason for skepticism. I don't know if you can see this chart, but on the left-hand side, we have a bunch of ciphers, and then in the middle column, it says the minimum number of qubits you need to break that cipher. So for RSA 2048, we need 6,190 qubits. For ECDSA, an elliptic curve system, for 512, you need 5,273 qubits. And then that's the minimum number that you need. The rightmost column is kind of a weird unit of mega qubit days, but that means the number of qubits you would need to run for 1 day to break that key. So to break a single RSA 2048 key in 24 hours, you'd need 1.17 million qubits running continuously for that day. To break ECDSA 512, you'd need 15.6 million, and we're current. Hmm? Yeah, I don't know the math, but yeah, it'd still take a while. Yeah.
As the length of the key increases, does the cost to quantum it get higher roughly linearly, or is it like is it feasible to make it very annoying people by just using huge keys?
Yes, that's one of the approaches you could use. The downside of that is with longer keys, the operations take longer, so you get performance penalties, and it's probably better to just swap out entirely for something that's totally safe. But yeah, IBM Condor is the current biggest quantum computer with 1,121 qubits. There might be classified computers that are bigger than this. I have to assume that the NSA and every other intelligence agency in the world is scrambling for this. So there might be bigger ones now, and also there might be bigger ones in the future that we have to protect against now, because there is a attack called Harvest Now and Decrypt Later, which is where the NSA or whoever can intercept your data, and if it's encrypted, they just store it and just wait until they have a computer that's big enough to break it. And so we have to protect against all future possible computers. And how we're doing that, like I said, is with post-quantum cryptography, which is a suite of new algorithms and new hard problems that are not vulnerable to attacks that we can just swap out. Like I said, there's been academic work since the 90s. More recently, we've been getting actual code implementations. The standards are being finalized, and we're implementing the code in parallel. And also in this kind of in-between period, a lot of the implementations I've seen have been hybrid systems. So it's like with the signal implementation is, it uses the regular signal double ratchet stuff and also a post-quantum system that way an attacker would have to break both of them in order to decrypt it. But they are separate, so that if this specific implementation or hard problem that they've implemented is broken in the future, they can swap that out fairly easy. So that's a thing that is happening, is these hybrid systems. NIST, or the National Institute of Science and Technology, National Institute of Standards and Technology, is a US government entity that does standards. And they have been doing a competition for post-quantum cryptography. So you can submit your algorithms, it goes through lots of review steps, and then at the end, NIST will choose several of them and say, these are what we consider to be good enough for the US federal government and military and intelligence and stuff to use. But that carries with it a lot of weight, so it kind of becomes the de facto standard for everyone. The post-quantum competition started in 2016. There were 23 signatures and 59 encryption systems that were submitted. It's going to be finishing up by the end of this year, so we'll have the standards. There have been some intellectual property issues where some of the algorithms have been patented, but in order to submit, you have to sign documents that say if your algorithm is chosen, the patent is essentially void. Like, it's still there on record, but it's not enforceable in any way. But it might be an issue. there also hasn't been any indication of interference. NIST has done several competitions for different cryptography systems, and in a previous one there was indications that the NSA had influenced it and influenced how they picked some of the constants in order to weaken the systems. We found out about it. NIST lost a lot of respect, and so that they've been a lot more, or from what I've seen, they've been a lot more above board this time in terms of how and where the contributions are coming from. And from what I've seen, there hasn't been any indication of any sort of interference. One of the main submitters, I guess, to the post-quantum cryptography competition is called the Crystals Lab, which is kind of sort of an acronym for the Cryptographic Suite for Algebraic Lattices. This is a lab of academics from all over the world who have been working together on this for a while, and they're very pro-lattice cryptography. That's their thing. Many of them invented a lot of it, and so they're very all on board with that. And they've submitted Kyber and dilithium, which are their names for the algorithms that they've submitted. And I guess they didn't want to wade into the Star Wars versus Star Trek fandom wars, so they chose to name their algorithms one of each, just to keep everybody happy. Kyber is their key encapsulation mechanism. A key encapsulation mechanism is similar to encryption, but it's a hybrid of public-private key encryption and symmetric encryption. So with this, for your message, you'll have a one key that uses to encrypt and decrypt it, and then you'll use Kyber to encrypt that AES, that key that encrypts your message. So Kyber doesn't, on its own, encrypt your whole message. It encrypts the AES key that encrypted your message. We do this for performance reasons mostly. And Kyber does have some performance issues compared to elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, which is like its equivalent system that we currently have. It's 2.3 times slower, and there's 70 times more data overhead, so more RAM usage. But it's important to know that there isn't any hardware acceleration for it yet. There is hardware acceleration for elliptic curve and RSA stuff. So in a couple years, when we have hardware accelerated Kyber, it will probably be a lot faster. And then dilithium is their signature scheme, also using lattices. It does have a large key and signature size. The keys are over a kilobyte, and each signature is 2.5 kilobytes, whereas RSA signatures are just 256 bytes. This can be an issue, especially for like TLS and like internet stuff, when a regular TLS handshake requires like 6 signatures and 2 public keys per page. And if you're talking 2.5 kilobytes versus 256 bytes, that's a huge increase in size. And some research by Cloudflare found that it might double the time it takes to do a TLS handshake. But this is kind of where we are. It's very new technology in the actual real world implementations. So I'm sure with hardware acceleration and more optimization, we will get this down and make it faster. Another signature scheme that might be chosen is called Falcon. It's based on the NTRU lattices, NTRU is the system that was made back in 1998, so it's like the OG post-crypto stuff, and it might end up being chosen. NIST can choose or can select several signature schemes, and they say that these are both valid for us to use. They don't have to just pick one. Falcon uses smaller keys, which is nice, but the signing speed is slower than dilithium because the main sticking point is that it requires double precision floating point math support to be done in constant time. So you need to be able to do 1 + 1 in the same amount of time it takes you to do very large numbers with very large decimals times other very large numbers with very large decimals. Yeah.
Is that in order to do it resistant to timing attacks, or is it
Yeah.
so that it can be fast enough?
All cryptographic math has to be constant time to prevent timing attacks, yeah. And no CPU currently has double precision floating point constant time math support. They do have implementations in software, but it only works on like specific CPUs, and it only kind of works because they're like kind of hacking it, which is great, but maybe not great for production cryptography stuff. But maybe in a couple years, if maybe the downsides of dilithium are big enough that people do add these hardware support to their CPUs, and then we'll go with Falcon. It's yet to be seen. For the actual code side of things, there's the Open Quantum Safe project. This is part of the Linux Foundation, is like funded by them. They are writing a system called liboqs, which is open source reference implementations of these algorithms in C. They started implementing in 2016, which is like way before the NIST things. So they have implementations of many different post-quantum algorithms, including the ones that NIST are going to choose, which is Kyber, dilithium, and Falcon. They've also been doing prototype integrations with OpenSSL and OpenSSH and some other things. So in a couple years, when we're all using post-quantum stuff, like if you go down enough levels, it'll probably be liboqs at the bottom somewhere. So yeah, like I said, there's the NIST standardization is going to be wrapping up this year. We'll get what NIST approves of. Code implementation and deployment is happening in parallel. And what you need to actually do depends on who you are and what you do. If you're in InfoSec, you should know that this is happening. You're probably going to have to implement this at some point. I would not be surprised if in a year or two we'll get post-quantum requirements in like your like compliance requirements like SOC 2 or PCI. If you're an early adopter, if you just like this stuff, you can play around with it being like in this transition from the academic world to the everywhere else world. There's a lot of cool stuff going on that you can play around with. And if you're doing things that an intelligence agency would find interesting, you need to be very careful and take this seriously because of the harvest now, decrypt later attack that I mentioned before.
Keep your metadata boring.
Yes. Also, there's quantum cryptography, which is kind of the other side of all of this, where you can use the quantum effects to make cryptographic systems. Hardware random number generators can use quantum effects, and pretty much all of them do at some level. A lot of times there will be other effects that are like the main source of entropy, but quantum is in there somewhere. There's also quantum key distribution, which is it's fairly academic still, but there's thoughts of distributing keys via quantum entanglement, which would be super cool. But yeah, that's another thing now. So in summary, quantum computers run Shor's algorithm, which can make factoring prime numbers easier, which is a threat to current public key cryptography systems. It's probably not currently feasible to do a quantum attack, but harvest now, decrypt later is a threat you have to work out for. The standardization and updates are coming soon, and cryptographers are vigilant and diligent. And to wrap up with a personal plug, you can hire me. I'm currently looking for a job. You can hire me to do post-quantum stuff, regular applied cryptography stuff, back-end software stuff. I'll leave my email up there, or you can just talk to me when you see me around. So, do you have any questions? Yeah.
How big is an RSA key? Sorry. How big of an How big of an RSA key can the current 1100 qubit thing crack, and how long does it take?
I'm not sure specifically. I think it's very small. I think I saw it was 128 bits or something. Not something that anyone would actually use for security at this point. And it would probably take a while. Most of the actual quantum programs that are run these days that I've seen are more helping with the research of the computer, especially testing for error rates and error correction and testing for decoherence and stuff like that. So yeah. Yeah.
Testing. Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I saw some news articles maybe a couple years ago that there, and I'm wondering if you know any more details about this, but there was some Chinese satellites doing some quantum key distribution, something or other. Was that actually a thing, or how? What was that?
Yeah, that's the key distribution that I was talking about, where you can send keys via quantum entanglement, and there have been several satellites that have done that. They do them on satellites because I believe the reason is because it's more shielded. There's less.
I feel like I saw some attacks on that way early on that because of the redundancy, a lot of times they'll do error correction and stuff, and then because of the error correction, then you can slice out the bits, and then it's still without disturbing, without it looking like the quantum key distribution is broken or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was curious how serious the key distribution is, or if that was just a purely academic test, or if it's actually a real thing that's actually happening.
As far as I know, it's still very academic and early in the life cycle, I guess, of that technology. So I would assume that it gets broken all the time, because all cryptography gets broken all the time when it's just starting out. But yeah, it's really cool though. Yeah.
I've been to other talks about quantum cryptography, and I'm interested in hearing your response to someone from the industry who, I don't know if I particularly would call him a salesman or not, but they were arguing that this is fundamentally a key doubling problem with AES, or RSA technically, that if you doubling key strength from 2048 standards to 4096 or something would fundamentally solve this problem. I don't know if I entirely believe that person, but I'm interested to hear how you would respond to that.
Yeah, it's you could do that, but then you're just kind of delaying the problem where if you we double it, and then in a couple years we have a paradigm shift and we can make really big quantum computers, and then we're here again. So it's I think it'd be better to swap out for lattices or other things.
So you mentioned that quantum computers can solve the traveling salesman problem, which is NP hard. Can it solve all instances of it, or just some with certain kinds of structures?
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Because I would think that would break all cryptography, including post-quantum.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure about that side of
Okay.
things. Yeah, I know the mathematicians who do the math stuff have proven that lattices are not vulnerable because they're entirely different. They're yeah.
Hello. Oh, hello. All right. This isn't more of a question, but this is more of some answers, I think, because like I've looked into some of this stuff too. So like if you go from like 2048-bit RSA to 4096, it doesn't like double the time it takes to like crack it. It's like super linear. So like the more time, like it's not gonna like double. It's gonna go up by some factor that's more than like twice. So that does push it away. But the problem is that like 4096-bit RSA really sucks for like efficiency. And you start getting into crazy numbers where like eventually what you're going to get is like RSA 8192, which is just like on the order of seconds. So it's just not worth it. Also, like in 2010, researchers were able to crack RSA 768. So that was 2010. I think that's the current record, and that was done with a classical computer. So hypothetically, like the next step is probably RSA 1024. We, in general, we should be using like RSA 4096, just because there's speculation that the NSA has the computational power / their army of mathematicians and be able to do something better than our current research. They've been known, for example, with logjam, to be ahead of the curve by maybe 10, 15 years in terms of like what our research is. And logjam is kind of like the something that we had to deal with before, where we used to use the same primes for all of our Diffie-Hellman. And it ends up that you could just solve the problem once and then apply it to everybody's connection. So we've since moved on to everybody generates random safe primes themselves to prevent them to force them to do more work per connection and do targeted attacks. So that's just some history on the current developments that we've been between post-quantum and also how the NSA is handling us.
Yeah, my understanding is that when the NSA did their interference with NIST, my understanding is that we still don't really know what was going on there. So, who knows what their capabilities are behind the scenes? Yeah. Yeah. Do you know if we know what that was about, or?
Like, what was it? So they backdoored a PRNG that they themselves created, inserted it into NIST, and had NIST standardize it, and they paid RSA's vice president. They paid RSA's vice president $10 million. I think he's missing, by the way. They paid him $10 million to standardize it in RSA Security's library. Like the people who made RSA made a company, and their security company, who's no longer ran by RSA, by the way, they actually put the dual EC DRBG into their library and made it the default, so everybody's like connections were using it if you were using their library. And basically, there was a constant. It used two elliptic curve points. And because they're using NIST P256, which is a prime order curve, there is provably a connection, a constant between the two curve points that if you knew it, you could actually reverse the PRNG. And so it became this really, like, quote, subtle, but somebody was like, hey, wouldn't this be breakable if somebody knew what this number was? And when WikiLeaks came out, they both, A, found out that the RSA vice president was paid, which there was speculation on, and B, they did find out that in NSA documents, there actually was, they knew this constant, even though they said, oh no, we threw it away, which is like, Yeah, I randomly generated this and threw it away. Trust me, is like the worst argument of security I've heard.
Yeah.
Especially involving the NSA. So I think that's what we're probably talking about.
Yeah. Any others? Yeah.
So with a lot of the post-quantum schemes in the NIST competition, something I've noticed is the key sizes are really big. I remember reading that when Facebook was trialing a hybrid with Kyber for TLS, they bumped down to a lower security level than is recommended because they couldn't fit it inside an IP packet. Are we just going to have to accept that everything is going to be really massive and terrible, or are there any advancements in smaller schemes in the future?
Yeah, that's definitely an issue. And we kind of have to deal with it, but also like we're kind of just barely starting the transition from like academic theory work to actual practical stuff. So I'm assuming there will be a lot of optimizations for that. I'm not sure how that will go yet because I don't think anyone is, but yeah, that's definitely something that everyone's looking at is the, yeah, and like long key sizes isn't something you can really use a hardware accelerator for because it's like, that's just data you have to transfer, but yeah. So it's, anything else? Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to record it, but I realized halfway through that I didn't actually click it. So I'm hoping I can refer people to their recording too. But yeah. Well, if that's it, thank you for coming and listening.